Hey folks, and welcome back to the Inside the Mix podcast. If you are a new listener, please do hit subscribe on the podcast, and thank you for joining me today. I probably got that around the wrong way. And if you're a returning listener, welcome back to the podcast. Now, in this episode, I am very excited to welcome our guest. There's a mixer, engineer, and producer, Adrian Hall. So I'm just going to run through a bit of a bio here for the audience listening if you're not familiar with Adrian. So he's got a wealth of experience working on all kinds of projects with artists at all levels of the industry, from worldwide household names up to up and coming unsigned bands. Equally at home, tracking a live band with a studio full of musicians or being left to mix tracks on his own. Adrian is both a technically adept and creative engineer and has worked with artists such as Tori Amos, Depeche Mode, Goldfrapp, the Black Eyed Peas, Alicia Keys, Robbie Williams, Shakira and Robin, and many more on top of that. And he's going to share with us some mix engineering pearls of wisdom that will no doubt inspire and improve your next project. Adrian, thank you for joining me today, and how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. My pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to this. It's going to be fun.
Fantastic. Yes, me too. It's for the audience listening, it was Dom, I think, who put me in touch with you, if I remember rightly. So
that's right.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, the Dom Morley episode. So after this episode, if you haven't listened to that one, do go check that one out. I think it's episode 56. I could be wrong.
He's great, Dom. I mean, he's brilliant. So we were at Metropolis together for many years. When we were both training. So yeah, he's great.
Yeah. That episode in itself has proved to be a very popular one. So no doubt this one will be as well. So I think it's quite cool, Adrian, if we just start off with a bit of your background, really. How did it all begin? How did your mix engineer journey start?
I went into it in a slightly roundabout route, in that I actually went to university and studied acoustics and vibration. I spent 4 years at Southampton and got a Master of Engineering degree. And I was all set to be an acoustic consultant. You know, had worked in my summers for the same company, a really good acoustic consultancy. I was all set there. But I'd always had this recording bug. So I kind of gave it all up to make tea in a recording studio, essentially. Threw away I'd probably be on a nice company salary now, company car, pension.
Yeah.
And it all went out the window, really, for to make tea and mend headphones in a studio.
Amazing. So with regards to, it's interesting you mentioned that about the master's degree, because that's Southampton Solent. Is that correct?
No, it's University of Southampton. There's a place
University
called
of Southampton.
Yeah, the ISVR, Institute of Sound and Vibration Research, which is it's like one of two places in the country to study acoustics.
Yeah. Because interestingly, I almost went down that route myself. So I remember I did an open day down at Southampton Solent, and I went in I can never pronounce it correctly, the anechoic chamber.
Yeah, anechoic.
Never get it right.
Yeah,
That's it, anechoic chamber. Yeah, where you go in and it's dead basically.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. We had one of those. Interestingly, there were two rooms right next to each other. One was the anechoic chamber, which was, I think, it's one of the largest in Europe. It's pretty huge, the ISVR. So you walk in, and you walk in on a grating. You're elevated above 6-foot foam wedges, and the room's huge but completely dead.
Yeah.
And they'd bring in whatever car engines and loudspeakers and whatever, test them in there. But then right next door, which people don't talk about this so much, but there was an echoic chamber, which was like solid concrete walls, hard plastered, floor and ceiling and walls. So it's like a huge squash court. Like if you snapped your fingers in there, it sounded like a gunshot had gone off.
Wow.
It was because the reverberation was so intense. I forget how long the reverb time was. Something like 30 seconds or something. It's ridiculous. And the aim of that is to create a diffuse sound field. So you put something in there, it makes noise, and sound is coming from literally all directions because the reflections are so hard and so strong. So right next to each other, these completely different acoustic environments. It's crazy.
I'd never considered it from the other perspective of actually creating an environment where it is so reflective. What is it like? Because I know when you go into an anechoic chamber and there's a certain feeling about it. When you go into a room whereby you've got all those reflections, what is it like on like your sort of mental, the psychology behind it? Is it quite weird?
It's really intense because in an anechoic chamber you get no reflections coming back at you. So if I'm talking to you and you're 10 feet away and you turn around and your voice is going into the wall, it's really hard to hear somebody, even if they're talking quite loudly. You don't realise how much of your environment and in a studio or in a control room, you're actually getting from the reflections.
Yeah.
And obviously the echoic chamber is the complete opposite. It's really intense. The smallest sound is really loud.
Yeah.
So everything's kind of magnified. It's fun. I mean, you'd never want to record anything in there, but
yeah. It sounds. I'd love to. I'm gonna have to put that on my sort of bucket list to go over these chambers, because I'd never considered it before. It sounds interesting. Do you still do any of the acoustic side of things?
No, not at all. Not at all. Gave that all up. So
yeah.
I mean, it helps sometimes if I'm in a studio and, in a live room, you can kind of suss out a live room pretty quickly.
Yeah.
In the sense of, okay, this isn't going to work for what I need. Let's put carpets down or baffle this or do that, But no, all the testing side of things and the maths side of things I totally don't use.
Oh,
it's all gone. It's all gone.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I ended up doing a master's in music production and music production and audio engineering. So I tossed up between the two, and admittedly I do use it, to be fair. But I was almost there with the acoustics. I almost went down that route.
I mean, after that, like when I decided I wanted to do recording, then I did go to SAE, School of Audio Engineering, which at the time there was only one in the UK. It was in London, and it was 2-inch tape, SSLs and Neves. They had a Neve VR, and they had. The year I went was the first year they got an SSL E series, so and they had 2-inch 24-track machines, which at the time I think Pro Tools at the time was 4 tracks or 8 tracks. So it was it was still very much that world, and I guess I was kind of one of the last generation of engineers to be trained on tape. So it was during that time, when I was at Metropolis, which I joined shortly after that. That the whole transition went away from 48-track analog on a big SSL to, by the time I left, people were starting to mix in the box, but not quite, if you know what I mean. It was almost there,
So do they, in theory then, I mean, you're saying they started to mix in the box. Do they not, I don't know if you would know actually, whether or not you're still in contact with them, but do they not still teach that process of using the larger consoles and the 48 tracks and then cutting it to tape? Is there not a call for them to do that?
I think, I don't know, very occasionally I go down to SAE London and do a masterclass. It's like one day a year or something, maybe they'll ask me down. Or go down, listen to some student mixes and give some feedback, that kind of thing. I haven't seen a 2-inch machine in there. It seems to be Pro Tools, which would make sense, I mean, 2-inch is such a specialist thing now. That I mean, I don't think I've used 2-inch tape in about a decade. Yeah. Maybe 1/2-inch. I've mixed to 1/2-inch maybe about 8 years ago.
Yeah.
But I don't have a tape machine in my studio. I'm Pro Tools. I'm digital, so.
Are you? I see some outboard gear behind you there. Have you got like a mixture of the two then? Are you working some in the box, a mixture of outboard and then digital?
Yeah, essentially. I mean, do you want me to swivel around? I can show you a little
please
bit.
Do. Yeah.
So, I mean, there is quite a lot of outboard.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of outboard racks. Some SSL stuff up the top there. Fusion, Manly New Mu, and then that's control surface. SSL control surface, and obviously Pro Tools and screens. But essentially, I'm mixing in Pro Tools. Yeah. But I have 24 I/O on my rig.
Okay.
So I use hardware inserts. So I'm using Pro Tools summing. Yeah. But obviously, like I'll send the money channels. Kick, snare, bass, lead vocal, maybe a couple of other little bits through through some of the outboard and back in. Yeah. And either record it back in or write down the settings. Yeah. But, I mean, honestly, these days, I can't really tell if a mix has been done in the box or if it's been done analog. Do you know what I mean? The plugins and what you can do in the box now is sonically great, So certainly for your listeners that are worried about, I have to use analog, have to do this, or I must use analog summing or whatever, I can't tell the difference. Do you know what I mean? It's more a workflow thing. So if I'm going for a particular sound, if I'm working with more of a alternative rock band or something, then, I might, run stuff through oh, make my hand go the right way. The SSL, I've got a Bus Plus and a Fusion, so that goes across the mix.
Yeah.
So you get that SSL flavor across the mix straight away. Or if it's a more soft acoustic thing, then I might use the Manly New Mew.
Yeah.
And I've got a kind of A-Designs Pultec stereo EQ there. So just across the mix bus, it's immediately softer.
Yeah.
Got some valves in the chain. It's just a different vibe to mix through.
Yeah.
But nothing that you couldn't really recreate with plugins. You know, I mean, obviously it's nice to have the hardware, and I love it. Don't get me wrong, but you know, it's a subtle thing.
Yeah.
And like I say, I can't tell. You know, you can't listen to the radio and go, "Oh, that's an analog mix and that's a digital mix." You know.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I remember. I think it was when I was chatting to Dom. It might have been Mike actually. I chatted to Mike Exeter as well.
Oh right, yeah.
A few weeks back,
Yeah.
and I think the idea some eyes that ultimately the listener, I mean, isn't too bothered about the journey of how it got to where it is. They're just more interested. I mean, you get the audiophiles who may be, but predominantly most listeners just want to hear something that sounds good. You know.
In a blind listening test, no. But, you know, because it's an art form, right? So it's all subjective. So if it helps get you to where you want to go, and you want to use analog or half-inch or 2-inch or whatever, or stay in the box, then fine. There's no right or wrong answer as such. You know, even if you're deluding yourself, there's a belief that this sounds better, you know. But if it helps you get there and helps you create the music and make the sound you want to make, you know, great.
Yeah.
You know, whatever helps you create.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, if it makes your workflow more efficient or it helps your workflow, then totally.
Yeah.
Just slightly off topic. Looking at the outboard behind you there, because it's slightly grainy on my back here. Are those distressors at the top there? That I see?
Yeah.
I thought they were. They were.
So there's a pair of distressors. I've actually got 3. There's one down here as well.
Ooh.
Because I initially bought a pair.
Yeah.
And then one of them was always on the snare drum. So I thought, well, I've only got one spare one. So yeah, I got 3 of those. So, I mean, this is all stuff I've collected over 20 years, 25 years of doing this. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And the latest thing now, of course, is there you can see the speaker in the sky. I don't know if you can see that.
Oh yeah, I can see. Are you mixing the 5.1?
Yeah, well, Atmos. Yeah, Atmos.
Okay. Yeah.
So my room's gone Atmos now. So.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I mean, it's amazing whether it stays and hangs around as a format. You know, other surround formats have come and gone, so we'll see. But I mean, it's great. It's great fun. It's great fun to mix. You know.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's not something I've ever had the opportunity to. I delved into ambisonics at one point and binaural, and then looked at head-related transfer functions and all this sort of business a few years back, but it kind of fell by the wayside after a while. But it's really interesting. Yeah. I did some 5.1 mixing, very crude mixes, might I add, way back when I was doing my master's degree. But, yeah. I'd love to get back into it again.
Yeah, well, you'll have to come down, have a listen. You know.
Oh, I'd love to. That'd be brilliant. Yeah. Out of interest, where are you based? Where are you doing this one today?
Sutton, southwest London.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You know, a fair amount of my clients are still, you know, in and around London. You know, so. I haven't moved out to the country like Dom and some others have, you know. It's kind of
yeah, I noticed a number sort of move because I'm in the southwest, so there's a number of sort of mastering studios, and there's Loud Mastering in Taunton, which I know is quite a prominent mastering, and there's Super Audio Mastering in Chagford, which is I've been there a number of times, so I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he worked on I've got it right in front of me here actually. He worked on Tubular Bells. With Mike Oldfield. So they seem to come because it's quite a nice part of the world down in the southwest. I'm biased, but
no, absolutely, man. I mean, I a couple of years ago, I mixed an album for Tori Amos, who was a studio down in Cornwall. You know, she's lived down there for 20 years or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, you know. But to be honest, most of my work now is remote. People send me files. And, you know, either send files back or we do an online thing where I can stream the mix to them and we can, you know, talk in real time about it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that requisite of having to be in the same room, you know, it doesn't exist so much anymore, which, to be honest, I miss. I'm not one of those guys that wants to keep the band away.
Yeah.
Far from it, you know, because I think when you have people in the room, there's something to be said for that. You know, I don't necessarily need the band there when I'm EQing the hi-hat or the second rack tom, But it's that thing of actually, once the mix is going, if you have people in the room or you're doing a thing online where it's real time, then you can make 10 decisions in 3 minutes, which would have taken 10 emails otherwise. So there's something to be said for that.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Actually, was with regards to actually the processes or the services that you're doing now. So you're not recording; you're just doing sort of remote-based mixing. With regards to that remote-based mixing, are you? Because I know there is software, and I've briefly looked into it myself, whereby you can stream the session, and the individual at the other end can listen in real time. Yeah. Are you offering that sort of service, or is it sort of like?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a few companies that do that kind of thing. I use a company called Audio Movers. Yeah. The plugin's called Listen To, where you just stream it down a web. I put it on my Pro Tools master bus, and it streams directly to a web server. There's a little latency. It's about like kind of 0.1, 0.2 of a second. Yeah. But it's basically real time. You couldn't record with it. It's not. Obviously the latency is a problem there. But yeah, certainly for streaming mixes and communication, it's great. But I mean, having said that, I do recording. I have a little booth here, and if I'm producing an artist, then obviously depends what the budget is. We might go. I've got a small booth with a vocal mic and guitar amps and even a drum set in the corner, but it's very much an overdub room. You have to record things one at a time. Yeah. So if I'm working with a project that's has to be more of a live band, then we'll go to other premises. But yeah, we'll come here and do overdubs and whatnot. But yeah, most of my work, probably 80% of my work is mixing, and probably 90% of that work is remote.
Yeah. This is an interesting question. Do you offer a mastering service as well, or do you just do the mixing and then you've got a referrer or someone you refer the master to, depending on the genre
I would
of music?
much rather send it to one of the few mastering engineers that I know and trust. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, these days, of course, budget doesn't always allow that. Yeah. So it's kind of a thing. If I'm mixing the whole EP or whatever it is, or album, and they want me to master it as part of the thing, then sure, I can give you a loud master. I can run it through a limiter and get it commercially loud and match the level between the tracks. The stuff that a mastering engineer will do. But I think what the mastering engineers are really good at is that objective third opinion. There's the artist, the mixer, producer, whoever, and then somebody who's never heard it all before and goes, you know what this needs. And obviously they have great gear, great EQs, amazing speakers, so they can hear everything. As much as I love my room, it's great. Having that, there's only a few I trust, to be honest. Mm-hmm. There's plenty of mastering guys out there who, are pretty good, but I wouldn't necessarily, advise a client to spend loads of money. Yeah. Because it's not going to be much different than what I would do. That's not to knock mastering engineers. The good ones are really great, and they're magic. It comes back, and I think mastering engineers hear music in a different way than mix engineers do. I don't know what it is. I obviously never trained as a mastering engineer, but if I hear a mix, I'm thinking about balance and the vocal sound and rides and dynamics, and somehow mastering engineers can hear it just as a finished piece of music and go, you know what this needs? I need to take out a little bit of 400 and add a bit of 7K. Yeah. And it's better. And obviously, as a mixer, you kind of do some of that. Yeah. But they hear it differently. I genuinely believe it's a different way, their whole process of how they interact with music, recorded music, and the finished 2-track product they get given is very different than what a mix engineer gets given. So, a great mastering engineer is, when it comes back, it like I say, it's kind of magic. It's like, what have you done? I don't understand what you've done, but it's better. That's great, And other times it comes back and it's a little bit disappointing and not as good as the loud reference that I've created. So, so then we have a little, we make sure it gets revised and is better than what I could do on my own, hopefully.
Yeah, it's mastering. I guess that's why I remember when I've spoken to mastering engineers, and you hear the phrase "the dark art of mastering." Yeah. I don't know if they necessarily like it described that way, but it is, isn't it? I guess it's like you say there. It's because you've got that objectivity, and you're looking at it from a totally different viewpoint. Where, as yourself, and when I've done mixes, you're sat there and you're invested in that mix. You know the nuances and stuff. Whereas that third party You can just see it from a totally different perspective.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
the audience that we have with the podcast
Mm.
probably maybe fall into that category where they may be outsourcing mastering or they're doing it themselves. If they are outsourcing mastering, what do you think they should look for in a mastering service? What is the key thing?
I guess it's more about what they're expecting the mastering engineer to do. Do you know what I mean? Because the mastering engineer is very much a finishing process. So if your balance is not right in your mix, the mastering engineer cannot fix that. Do you know what I mean? So particularly with things in the mid-range, you know what I mean? So if your mix overall just needs a little tonal shaping, or it needs to be a bit brighter, or you've been too heavy with a bass, so we need to tuck some stuff, then that's what mastering will sort that out, and it's great. But if you want your snare drum louder, but your vocals are too loud, or you know the balance of the guitars against the keyboards is not right, obviously a mastering engineer is going to have, it's not impossible, but it's very difficult to make that kind of adjustment. So I think you have to be very happy with the balance of your music and the way it makes you feel and the dynamic changes with your music. Because one of the first things that, when mastering started to get loud in the 90s, you know, when I was training, one of the first things you realized what the limiter did was squash your dynamics. So, you know, in the studio, you'd be going along in the verse, you hit the chorus and it jumps up great. But obviously, once you put a limiter on that, the limiter is going to pull the chorus down. So suddenly your dynamic range, your transition from your verse to your chorus is much less of a jump. So it might not have the impact that you wanted. So what I do is I always mix through a limiter. It'll go on quite late in the process, but I as part of the mixing process, I am hearing what a limiter would be doing that brings it up to commercial loudness levels. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
So I'm not printing the mix with the limiter on, or rather I'll print two versions with and without the limiter. But I have an idea of what the limiter is going to do to the dynamics of the track. And I'm not worried about multi-band processing and, you know, mastering EQ and all that. It's just once I get it to a certain level, and it's hitting my mix bus how I want it, and or the half-inch emulation, you know, it's at 0 VU, okay. Then I know that a commercial release is going to be 5 dB louder, you know, because I'm referencing, right? I'm pulling references into my session. So I know, okay, if I turn down this commercial track 5 dB, then it kind of sounds like my mix approximately. Cool, great. So I know how much gain I need to apply to the limiter to get it up to commercial levels.
Yeah.
Is this making sense?
It is, yeah. And
okay, so then I can put a limiter on and make it as loud as commercial release, and I know how it's going to feel going into a chorus or dropping into the second verse, or do you know what I mean? How you got to keep those dynamics, because it is part of what makes music exciting. If your verse comes along and you just kind of seamlessly blend into the chorus and then back through to the second verse, then obviously it's not going to be as exciting as it could be. So I need to know what the limiter's doing, even if it's not me that's going to be applying the final limiter.
Yeah.
So I guess the thing is to get your mix to a state where it sounds and feels really good without the limiter.
Yeah.
You know, and then the limiter really is only just making it loud. You know, your mix shouldn't like completely fall apart if you take the limiter off, which I've had some rough mixes that are like that, you know, because people are doing too much of the limiter. If you're doing kind of 10 or 12 dB of limiting to get it up to commercial loudness levels, then that's going to massively affect the balance of the mix when you take the limiter off.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because the limiter's squashing everything, holding it in place. So my advice would be try and mix without the limiter, and then the limiter on the end is really only doing, say, 5 or 6 dB.
Yeah.
And if you send that to a mastering engineer, then hopefully it'll be much closer to what you want it to be. Your mix will be in a better position going on the way to mastering, if you're not leaning so heavily on the final limiter.
Fantastic advice. It echoes a conversation I had about a month ago with another producer, because we were discussing mix bus and what is on your master bus, mix bus, master bus. What is on your master bus when they're mixing, and we had this exact discussion about limiting and how whereby we would put that on the end just to get an idea of what it's going to sound like in the mastering phase.
Absolutely.
And I can't remember if he said that he was mixing into it throughout the whole session. Probably like yourself, it came in at the end.
Yeah.
But audience listening is a great thing to do.
I am mixing into a mix bus chain from the start. So, like I say, if I have a band and I want the SSL sound, then I'll put that on right at the start of the mix. Or even if I'm mixing in the box, then there's a few things in there to emulate kind of analog saturation. So as I mix, it's on all the time. I might adjust it, but it's on from the start of the mix, and the limiter is on there but just bypassed. You know what I mean? So at any point I can just go, okay, what's it sound like if I crash this by 5 or 6 dB? But yeah, the mix bus is more for color and that kind of thing of a little analog flavor if you want it or not. I have a tape machine emulation, a UAD one, but I mean, use whatever you like. So I can instantly go, oh, does this sound better at 15 IPS or 30 IPS?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, you get a flavor through the mix right from the start.
Yeah. So you're running that throughout the whole mix process, and then you're rendering, bouncing, whatever it may be, printing the mix
with all that stuff on. The only thing that doesn't get printed is the final loud limiter.
Yeah. Fantastic stuff. I love that. It's giving me food for thought now, because when I've done mixes, I've had the tape emulation on there, but for whatever reason I take it off at the end, which is just going to totally. It's not going to represent what I've mixed into right at the end,
I mean, it's surprisingly, even, I mean, what I found, and your listeners may disagree, is that the tape emulators I like to use, I don't slam tape like you would maybe get away with in the old days if you had an actual half-inch machine.
Yeah.
So what I find is if you're actually pushing it into the red, then it doesn't really distort like tape. It's kind of like that. But I'm kind of using it where it's designed to be used, around 0 VU.
Yep.
Does that make sense? So you kind of,
yeah.
I'm not pinning the meters. You know what I mean? Maybe +1, just slightly into the red. But I'm around 0 VU. That's where it's designed to be hit in an ideal world. And it's one of those things where what I want it to do is I want it to be disappointing when I bypass it.
Yeah.
It's not like you put the plug in and you go, oh my God, my mix sounds amazing. That's sorted out all my problems. It's more like, oh, if I bypass it, it just feels a bit. Oh, it's not, it's better with it in. It's just a little bit of flavor, the little bit of harmonic distortion that our ears like, a little bit of saturation. But I'm not caning it, you know what I mean? And it's there from the start as a flavor. I'm mixing into it. And if I want a more clean mix, then I'll probably be running at 30 IPS or not at all. If it's a pop thing, I might not use the tape machine because it doesn't get you that clean, super punchy, bright, open pop thing. Then I'll be just doing digital summing.
Yeah.
Likewise, if it's an organic band, then sure, I might run it at 15 IPS. They want it to sound like their favourite records, which, don't have that extended top end. There's a bit of high frequency saturation that the tape is doing. So, it depends on the situation. There's no one size fits all.
Yeah. That's the beauty of music, I think, in creating and mixing. It is the fact that you can go in and you can be creative, you can try things and put something, a plug-in. I'm speaking from the mixing in the box here because that's primarily what I do, but you can put something on something, and there is no hard and fast rule in terms of what you can and cannot do. And what you can create, which is the great thing about it,
Yeah, and the plugins are so good nowadays. The emulators and the. I remember when plugins, when they first came out, when I was at Metropolis and we were mixing on analog consoles, and the plugins, they all kind of sounded the same. Do you know what I mean? It was like, well, okay, this might look like it's one type of EQ and another one might look like a different type of EQ, but actually they were all kind of doing the same kind of things, really. And if you matched the cues and the frequencies, they weren't massively different, which they are in the analog world. Like if you boost, 3K on an SSL, it sounds very different than boosting 3K on a Neve.
Yeah.
Whatever they're doing, the bell shape, the curve, the harmonics that generates, all that's very different. But the early days of plugins, they were kind of all the same. And that's very much different now. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Plugins have color, they have personalities, or some of them do. And likewise, you can get the super surgical plugins that you couldn't ever do with an analog EQ. That's an interesting topic in itself, actually, because occasionally I get sent Pro Tools sessions with, where other people have got it to a certain level and they send it to me to mix, and they send me their whole session if they're working in Pro Tools.
Yeah.
And one of the common things I see is a lot of EQing of very specific, narrow frequencies that basically make no difference when I bypass it. So somebody spent an awful lot of time and effort to pull out, tiny amounts on really narrow Q bandwidths out of a vocal or something, and really it's like, this makes no difference when I bypass it, so I'm just going to get rid of the plugin.
Yeah.
So I think one of the benefits of, coming up with that training on analog consoles is that actually EQ primarily is a tone sculpting thing. All the records you know and love from, well, basically anything before mid-2000s, which was mixed on analog discs, nobody's super fine sculpting vocals. It's all big moves, tonal control. So yeah, I would say to your listeners, if you're EQing stuff, go for tone and the color that you want first. Big moves, broad cues, use the vintage style EQs first to shape the sound where you want it, and then sometimes there might be some super specific things you can notch out, but don't waste half an hour notching out 6 different frequencies with a Q of 30. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's really interesting you mentioned that, because I live in the realm of TikTok, etc., and on there, and I've seen a video. I saw it this weekend, and it was a video on EQing vocal,
right.
And there was the roll off of the low end,
sure,
and then there was just multiple tiny, like the tiniest Q, just dropping frequencies, and I'm thinking, like, what is that doing? What could that possibly be doing to that sound? And it kind of leads me on nicely to this next question, in the sort of like the difference between sort of a novice mix and or a beginner mix maybe, and sort of a radio friendly, or maybe a professional mix. Kind of everything you've mentioned up until this point sort of leads on to this question. What would be the primary difference between the two? So if you're just starting out mixing, what should you not be doing?
It's obviously a big topic. One of the, I guess the most fundamental thing, and there's a nice story actually I'll tell you about this. The fundamental thing is balance, right? And I remember this was introduced to me very early on in the game, because I had the good fortune to assist a guy called Bill Price, who's no longer with us, but he's a legendary British engineer. He's worked with everybody. He produced half of Nevermind the Bollocks for the Sex Pistols. He produced the Clash's Sandinista, mixed Guns N' Roses back in the day, worked with Paul McCartney, brilliant engineer. I think he was in-house at Air Studios in the 80s or something, on Wessex. But so I was assisting him on a Clash live album. And part of my job at the start of the day was to put the reels on, get the faders up, check everything's coming through, label the desk, all that kind of stuff. And I remember some of these live tapes, obviously they're live recordings, so they would come through and they're pretty ropey, So I pushed the faders up, and I remember I can't remember which track it was, but there was one time when I went, "Oh, this one's a bit of a mess." You'll have fun with this one, Bill. And so I kind of left him with the multi-track. This is a Metropolis. Went upstairs, make a cup of tea for the two of us, and bring it back down. It only took me 5 minutes. So but by the time I came back down, the multi-track had gone from what I perceived to be a real mess, a real problem to solve, to sounding like a Clash album in 5 minutes.
Wow.
And I looked at the desk, and he'd barely done anything. It was just the balance. It was all in the faders.
Yeah.
He knew how to balance the drums the bass against the guitars and where the vocals sat against all of that. And Bill was a pretty, minimal mixing engineer anyway. But it was just that the balance was right for that band and that genre, and he knew how to get it. You know what I mean? My first instinct at that point would have been, I was still training, would have been to dive in with the EQs and fix stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Which, obviously he went into, the mix wasn't done in 5 minutes, he went into that later on, but it was just that first impression of, oh wow, this sounds like music now, because the balance is musically making sense. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
The parts are all working together, nothing's swamping, nothing's too loud, too quiet, which is a testament to the band too. But that was a real eye opener. And then later on, as my training progressed, I assisted more and more mix engineers. It was that thing of like I would look at people's mixes on the board. That's one of the benefits of being an assistant. And the old way of training is that, at the end of the night, it'd be your job to recall everything, print the whatever, vocal up, vocal down, bass up, bass down, instrumental, TV track, masters at the end. Maybe the engineer stayed, maybe he didn't. So you got to see what they did.
Yeah.
And listen to, what has he done with the vocal? Put the EQ in and out on the desk or on the outboard gear they're using. Oh, I see what that's doing. And none of these guys, who were great engineers I assisted, Alan Mulder, Stephen Fitzmaurice, Jim Abyss, so many, loads of great mixers passed through Metropolis. And there was no magic frequency. There was nothing on the desk that they were doing any different than what I was doing. But it was just that level of attention to detail. It wasn't like Alan Mulder's vocal sound or snare drum sound was some magic frequency in the SSL that nobody else used. Everybody had the same tools.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Which is kind of like it is today as well. Everybody's got the same plugins, more or less, stuff that does the same thing. So it was just the attention to detail and the tiny, tiny changes, the 10,000 tiny changes that they'd done to everything across the whole desk or in the, in the box nowadays. There was no magic secret sauce, which I was kind of, led to believe. Maybe if I just find that magic kick drum frequency, is it 80 hertz or 90 hertz? Or maybe it's 65 hertz. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? There was nothing super special. It was, they were kind of doing what everybody else was doing.
Yeah.
Which was, again, that was another lesson. It was like, okay, it's actually the reason their mixes sound so good is because they've made 10,000 tiny decisions. It's not like some amazing secret that only they knew.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So again, I think, there's a lot of stuff on the internet about, this is the magic sauce.
Yep,
well,
the silver bullet.
Yeah, it might help you. I'm not saying it's not, but it's not, and it's not going to apply in every case.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Depending on the aesthetic of the band and what the artist wants, whether they want it to sound that way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you're mixing the drums for, a super hype, I don't know, a really heavy rock band, as opposed to mixing the drums for a band that wants to sound like Neil Young, it's going to be very different, your approach. It should be different. So there's no, there's no magic formula that's always going to work.
Yeah.
Balance.
Mm-hmm.
Be bold with your EQ and tonal changes. If something wants to be bright, then make it bright.
Yeah.
If something needs to be, you need to pull all the mid range out of it, then do it. Don't be too subtle with it. I think somebody said that to me early on when I was still in Assistant Metropolis. Like, they listened to one of my mixes, and it was one of the other assistants actually, and he said, "Oh yeah, you're being very conservative with your EQ." And I kind of took. I was like, "Okay, yeah." Particularly, I know, like, your audience, there's a lot of synth.
Yeah.
A lot of synth kind of fanatics in your crowd, and the great thing about synths and instrumental music or synth-based type music is that there's not your ear doesn't know what to expect. Do you know what I mean? If you hear somebody singing, you hear a vocal or an acoustic guitar, it kind of has to sound a certain way because that your ear is used to hearing that in the real world. Whereas with the synth, you can EQ 20 dB at 3K into it, or pull out whatever, completely roll off the top. There's absolutely no rules because there is nothing natural in a synth sound.
Yeah.
So particularly with those kind of instruments or synth drums, same thing. There's no, it doesn't have to sound a certain way. So you can be really bold with the way you shape the sound in the way that you can't if it's an acoustic kind of band.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So
it does, yeah. And I
you can be really bold with. Yeah, I mean, like I've got sent some synth type tracks recently, and again, everything's really big and wide and stereo. So if everything's big and wide and stereo, then it's almost like giant mono. It doesn't necessarily feel wide because you've got one wide synth sound on top of another wide synth sound. Actually, it'll feel wider if you pan one synth sound as a mono sound all the way to the left and a completely different synth sound as pan it all the way to the right, both sides. So you've got differences in the left and right, and that will make it feel wide.
Yeah.
In a way that you can't do if everything's just coming up the middle, 100% wide stereo.
Yeah.
So yeah, with synth stuff, you can really go to town with it. There is, there's no need to be notching out tiny frequencies and getting specific with it. Be bold with it.
Yeah, it's fantastic that you mentioned there about the stereo width of the synth track, because my question was, you preempted my question, which was going to be, how do you stop that wide stereo spread from sounding mono? And it's exactly like you said there, is where you have the different timbre, I guess you could call it, of your synth instruments on the left and right. So to have that difference there.
Absolutely, and I mean, I think the temptation is to go down the route of I'll just use a stereo widener on this synth and not that one.
Yeah.
I mean, not that anybody's that bothered about mono compatibility these days, but it kind of still does affect some playback devices. Like my daughter had some kind of boombox thing, docking station. And there was one speaker on it. Do you know what I mean? So in 2020, so you're kind of going, okay, that's odd. And obviously, if you're listening out of a phone, it's effectively mono, or any other kitchen radio type source. And the danger with stereo wideners is that actually anything that gets wider in stereo usually cancels a bit in mono. So you have to be careful about using them, because something that you wanted to be massive and wide, actually, if it's playback on something that's more like a mono device, like, I forget which it is it an Alexa or a HomePod? One of those two is effectively a mono speaker.
Yeah.
So even nowadays there are mono playback devices. So you should check in mono, really, just to check that it's not completely disappearing. I mean, yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on mixing in mono, out of interest?
I don't mix in mono. I check in mono. I will definitely check in mono. But although I check in mono, I have two speakers. So those are my speakers. So you got the Genel X. Where is it? Can you see that? Yeah. So there you go. That's the main Genel X, and then up here, these little Avantone guys.
Oh, I've seen that. I've seen those in so many studios.
The little mix cubes, they're called. So I have two of those. There's another one. Oh, there you go. That's much better set up. So the Avantones are like, the crappy car radio or kitchen stereo. So I use those for checking mono. But I'm still listening through two speakers. So it's mono through two speakers, not true single speaker mono. But yeah, I'll check it, absolutely, mainly for things like balance and rides. So say, for example, you have a guitar or synth panned one side and your vocals coming down the middle, and it's a call and answer thing. I've just done this on a mix. So the call and answer thing sounds great in stereo because you can hear the counterpoint away from the vocal very clearly in stereo. But if you put it in mono, then they both sit on top of one another. So you have to make sure that the guitar pokes through where it needs to and the vocal comes back. So that's kind of what I use to check mono. It's more that the music still makes some kind of sense in mono.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? The interplay between the instruments. Can I hear that bass fill? Can I hear that guitar fill?
Mm-hmm.
Can I hear all the lyrics on the vocal? You know, that's kind of what I check in mono. Usually at quite a quiet level.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. It's so I don't mix. Obviously, it's 2023. Nobody's mixing for dedicated mono unless you really want to punish yourself, So, or the aesthetic you're mixing for is that it's mono. Do you know what I mean? If it's I can't even think of an example now, but maybe some of the retro type stuff. I mean, I know Dap Kings, Mark Ronson's band. They're stereo, very much so. But if you were being super authentic or trying to recreate something, you might mix for mono only. But I've never done that.
No. It's interesting. I often ask this question to people when it comes to mixing and mixing in mono.
Yeah.
Because like yourself, I use it primarily just to make sure. But like you mentioned there so everything has its place, and I can hear everything that I need to hear when I should.
Yeah.
And nothing's masking anything else.
Yeah.
Adrian,
I think actually, I've just thought of something like I don't know if a lot of your listeners are mixing on headphones or only or something.
Yes.
I mean that it's great. Don't get me wrong. Headphones are amazing for any number of things, particularly for checking edits and whatever. But there is a danger with them where it comes to phase and the perception of phase, particularly phase cancellation on headphones. Like your headphones can actually be completely out of phase, which on a pair of speakers would turn your head inside out. You get that really uncomfortable feeling where there's nothing in the middle and it feels like you're half underwater.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen on headphones, at least not to my ears. Like it's very interesting. Like I can put a mix completely out of phase and it'll sound different, but it won't sound like it's making me sick in a way that it does when your speakers are completely out of phase.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? You know that feeling?
Yeah. It's been a very long time since I've experienced it. I think it was when I was at university and we did a trial just to see what it was like.
Yeah. It's so I'm obviously I'm not talking about your whole mix being out of phase. Hopefully it's not. I'm talking about individual elements within that being out of phase or phasey.
Yeah.
It's actually quite hard to hear on headphones, which is something that presents itself immediately on speakers. So, like I say, headphones, I definitely check my mixes on headphones. I spend a good amount of time, particularly with vocals and editing and clicks and pops and that kind of stuff on headphones, because you're removing the environment. So you can have it quite close to you. You can hear all that stuff in a really detailed way, which is great. But I think, again, sometimes when you're mixing on headphones, because you can hear all the detail, you're not as bold as you should maybe be. So the trouble I've had with headphones, if I do a mix too long on headphones, and then I put it back on the speakers, it always feels a bit flat.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can hear all the details, and I can hear that second guitar part, and I can hear all the vocal harmonies because it's really close to my head. But when you put it on speakers in the real world, suddenly everything doesn't quite pop out as much as you were used to on headphones.
Yeah, I guess it's because with the headphones, it's inside of your head, isn't it? The sound is in here.
Yeah, and usually it's a bit louder, and you have no real world noise and distractions. So, I mean, don't get me wrong. It's like I understand it's a budget choice as well for a lot of people. And headphones are great, and you can get some great headphones nowadays. But I would say even if you check your mixes on a pair of budget speakers, it'll give you a real world, kind of perspective on it. I mean, what we used to do in the old days was, you'd spend all day on the SSL in front of the speakers, but as soon as you walked to the back of the room and sat down on the couch, you would hear your mix differently.
Yes.
It's just a different perspective suddenly, or, I mean, amazingly, like when somebody else walks in the room, even if you're sat in exactly the same place, just having somebody else in the room makes you hear your mix differently, even if it's not one of the band or the producers.
Yeah.
I don't know if your listeners have ever experienced that, but
I'm not. Is that to do with the psychological element of having someone else in the room?
Yeah.
Just there, present with you, and knowing someone else is there, and you start to perceive your mix differently because someone else is listening to it.
Yeah, exactly. It takes you out of that focus of you being so into the details, and suddenly makes you listen to it from an objective listener's point of view. Somebody who's just walked in the room.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely sit on the sofa at the back or listen from the doorway with a cup of tea or something, because it will get your head back into that kind of fresh space where you're not hearing it the same way you've been hearing it for the last 2 hours with your head down in front of the speakers.
Yeah. Great advice. Great advice.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm doing a lot of talking.
No. It's fantastic stuff. I've got one more question, and this question comes from our community group. So this is from a producer called Blockhouse. I think his name's Nick, if I remember rightly.
Right. Okay.
I'm glad he asked this question because it touches on the Depeche Mode "Enjoy the Silence" live in Berlin video, which I have rinsed and repeated so many times. It's so good. And he says he's interested in your work recording live shows. He says, in my own experience, live performances can lose something when they're recorded. So what do you do to ensure that the recording captures the energy and atmosphere of the live show in the mixing process?
Okay, yes. It's interesting you talk about the Depeche Mode one, actually, because before... it was Daniel Miller, who was the head of Mute, who I did a lot of work for at the time. And he asked me to mix the Depeche Mode 5.1. I'd never worked with the band before. And his specific brief to me was, I want to be able to hear the crowd interaction, and I want to hear the crowd singing when they sing.
Yeah. Because
he felt that was always lacking from previous versions. And obviously, if you go to a Depeche Mode gig, there's a load of hardcore fans down the front, particularly with something like Enjoy the Silence. So really, it's part of that atmosphere. The way they interact, obviously what makes a live recording exciting, hopefully. So his specific instruction was make sure you get as much of that as you can. And at in Berlin, that they were actually doing 2 nights there with a day off in between. So we actually had the benefit of being able to put mics up on the first day, and then I had a day where I could listen to the mixes, do some quick mixes and listen to the recording from the first night before they played the second night. So we actually changed some of the mic positions of the audience capture mics for the second night, because we were trying to capture that front row.
Yeah. So
I mean, this is very specific, but it in a venue sometimes we put up extra ambience mics hanging from the upper balconies and stuff, and where the front of house position is, but they're often capturing the sound in the room, so it's almost like you're recording the venue, the PA. Yeah, it's not actually got that much crowd in it. Does that make sense? Because the crowd, the most interactive part of the crowd is at the front of the audience. So actually we had mics on the stage behind the PA, just behind the PA, but pointing at the front rows of the crowd. Which were immensely useful for capturing that live energy. Yeah. And it worked out well, it worked out well. Capturing a good live show is obviously, the band have to give it. And obviously Depeche Mode are great, they're it's a fabulous band. The energy they all have on stage, from Dave the singer to Christian the drummer, Pete Gordino playing keys, they're all brilliant. So what they're giving you is fantastic to start with, and then obviously if you capture the crowd properly, then you've got that interaction, which is gold. It's what you're going for. Yeah. And then the only thing is not to make it sound too studio. So obviously you want the instruments to sound good, but the energy from the crowd, if you mix the crowd too low, then it's particularly on a big stage like Depeche Mode, the guitar amps are 20 feet from the keyboards and they're 20 feet from the drums. So it's almost like you're in a studio anyway, because the spill on stage is so low. So you're not going to get that interaction. You need the audience mics to make it have that energy. And then you just got to be careful not to mix it out of the final product, Yeah. In a smaller venue, if your audience members are recording their own live gigs and things, then, like I say, definitely try and get mics maybe on the stage, but pointing at the crowd, if you know what I mean. Yeah. And then the energy of what comes down the vocal mic, if there is a vocal mic on stage, like you're going to get a lot of spill from the crowd down that vocal mic. So again, obviously you have to turn it down, but don't completely gate it out, because it's going to sound really odd when it comes in and out.
Back in. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually you do get a kind of certain ambience from the crowd going down the vocal mic and then into whatever vocal reverb you're using. So don't clean it up too much.
Yeah.
It's tricky. It's really hard. It involves immense amounts of fader rides. Like you look at the lead vocal fader on that Depeche Mode thing or any other live things I've done, and you know, I turn it down maybe 10 dB when the singer's not singing and then back up or whatever. But it's all about the rides, the fader rides.
Yeah, yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. It does.
Quite technical and quite esoteric, really. But
no, I think you're exactly right. I remember when I played in live gigs, and we sometimes record them, and a lot of it was. I remember we did one recording, and then it was mixed, but it was mixed to sound like a studio recording.
Right.
And then you just lost everything. The fact that it was live. It might be because we played quite bad at the time, which is quite possibly what it was. But yeah, I think capturing the audience is huge. And I think that's why I love that video so much, because of the interaction in it. Yeah. Did you replace any? Because I know you said you didn't have any issues with Spear. Well, obviously the Spear was minimal. But did you replace any particular sounds?
No.
Did you do any overdubs in it, or is it just all?
There are no overdubs in that. That's as it came off stage. I mean,
wow.
You know, there will have been a couple of edits in terms of like, you know, I might have just nudged a couple of things because, you know, somebody came in early or something. But there's no fixes with a band like that. I mean, you know, they're obviously great musicians. They've been touring for years. They know exactly what they're playing. No, there's no. I'm not having to compensate on the thing, and there was certainly no overdubs. You know, I mean, I think live albums in the 70s, you know, there were a few notable ones that kind of actually were basically replayed in the studio, but certainly not with Depeche Mode. No need to do that.
When you've honed your skill set to that extent, then like you said, they've been playing for so long.
Absolutely.
And it must have been an absolute joy to work with.
It was a total pleasure. Yeah.
It's fantastic. I'm probably going to watch it again after this interview. I watch it quite frequently I think it's also, it's going off on a bit of a tangent now, but it's the visual in the background as well. It's kind of like you look at it and it's the sound and it's the visual and it's the performance and everything in it.
That's Anton Corbijn. Obviously, he's a genius at what he does, and you know, has had a long collaboration with the band. So the visuals on that whole thing were incredible. You know, the big projector screens and stuff, and it was quite an experience. You know, I actually saw their show in London, the O2 first, to meet some of the crew and whatnot and sort out technicalities, and then. Yeah, I was flown out to Berlin, spent 3 days in Berlin with them. But, brilliant. All the crew around them as well, you know, just first rate. All of them. Stunning, you know.
Fantastic. Adrian, we're coming up to the hour mark now. So,
really?
Yeah. I tell you, I've got all those questions written down. I never get through them all, but which is fine because it's one of those organic things. It's just conversation and the questions come up. That's why I'm sort of like writing as you're talking, thinking, I want to ask that in a minute and ask that bit. But a big thank you for joining me on this today, and I know the audience are going to get so much out of this. These interviews are great when I talk to mix engineers and producers and whatnot. If our audience want to learn a bit more about you, where can they find you online?
Just through my website, I guess, www.adrian-hall.com. It's got a list of credits and whatnot, and you know, various music videos, including the Depeche Mode thing, I think.
Yes.
But you know, my email's up there as well, so if they want to get in touch, feel free. You know,
brilliant.
I'm not at that level of mix engineer where somebody's screening all my messages and all that kind of stuff. You know, it's just me. So
yeah, brilliant. I will put that link in the episode notes as well.
Sure. Any questions that people have, you know, if people want to ask me something, I'm happy to follow up.
Brilliant stuff. All right, I will let you enjoy the rest of your Sunday today. And once again, a huge thank you for joining me on this today.
Thank you for having me. Brilliant.
Cheers, buddy.
Cheers, Mark. Bye.